If you like this video, please rate, comment, share and subscribe. If you dislike it, please tell me why so I can improve. I want to talk today about the notion of transferred responsibility, which is expressed in the Bible. For example, in Genesis 25, and I am reading this off a piece of paper. I, the Lord, thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. Now that sounds really unfair, and of course it is really unfair, and that notion of transferred responsibility is found in many other places in the Bible. For example, it's found with the idea of the scapegoat, the goat that you put all your evils on, and then evil deeds on, and then you send it out into the wilderness where presumably it dies of thirst or starves to death or something. It's all your sin is handed onto the goat there. It's also in the idea of original sin, the idea that sin is handed down from Adam and Eve to the rest of history, human beings, forever. Because of something that they did. And also it's even found, some might say, in the crucifixion, because Jesus has been punished for us. He's the scapegoat, and therefore we can save ourselves because he takes on our sin, and it's all blamed on him even though it's not his fault, and that's how it's sorted out. And once again also with the Jews, where they say that they will be cursed for murdering Jesus, which is of course where the Holocaust comes from. And there is basically no way to justify that on a moral basis at all, although possibly it's got some kind of anthropological basis in the idea of contamination, infection and the like. However, it does have a very strong causal basis, these four generations. Suppose you have dominant and recessive alleles in a particular individual. And now the recessive alleles of a gene, the genes that don't get expressed, are the ones that are more likely to carry disease, because if a dominant allele carries a disease, it's not likely to be passed on to the next generation because it will make the offspring unhealthy and unable to reproduce. But the recessive allele, because it can be masked by the dominant allele, can be passed on, and then there's a carrier. An example of that being the X-linked red-green colour blindness. There are a few dominant diseases, for example, genetic diseases, for example Huntington's chorea is like that. Because it doesn't develop until after childbearing age. Suppose you have two individuals like that, right? At the top there, you've got one individual which is heterozygous, it has a dominant allele and a recessive allele, and the other is homozygous and healthy and doesn't carry the recessive gene. Those are each going to produce two types of gamete. One of them will be dominant, one of them will be recessive in that case. On this one they will have two dominant gametes. It then goes on to the next one, next generation, this is the second generation, where it goes, that's fine, that's a carrier, that's a carrier. Now look at this. If you have incest between a parent and a child, you then end up with this situation. One of these is the first generation, the other is the second generation. When those mix together, you have the possibility of two dominant alleles, in which case they've got away fine, dominant and recessive, in which case it's a carrier, and there's a risk in the next generation, which is the fourth generation, another carrier, or someone who is actually affected by both recessive alleles and therefore has that genetic problem. Not all recessive alleles carry genetic problems, of course, but there's a risk. So every time you do a cross like that, the risk of these recessive alleles being expressed becomes greater, and the risk of those genes being expressed as a phenotype becomes greater. So, whereas, genetically speaking, it will happen, from a moral point of view that can't be okay. But there could also be other causal processes. So the situation where it says in the Bible, I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation, them that hate me, is actually, sadly, quite a scientific observation of what happens when you have that sort of thing happen. I mean, I've used incest as an illustration here, but there are obviously other processes that go on, and these things get handed down from generation to generation and have serious effects on descendants. And eventually, I mean, another example would be diethylstilbestrol. For example, mother takes diethylstilbestrol, her child then has a double uterus, her child will then have impaired fertility sometimes, and so forth. So it will get handed down, and that's not a genetic thing. So I would say that that observation of transferred responsibility and defilement is not a moral observation at all, or a religious observation even. It's an observation about the way cause and effect generally works, in almost a scientific way. And I think we should just leave it at that and just recognise that the things we do have huge consequences for future generations that haven't even been born yet. And in the distant past, say in the early 20th century, certain activities will basically cause serious problems, ripples into the 21st century and beyond. So there you go. Nice, isn't it? Bye.